I've been driving for a rideshare service for a few years now, mostly during the late-night shifts. The roads are quieter, the tips are better, but sometimes you end up with a story that sticks with you for all the wrong reasons. This happened a few months ago. It was around 2:30 a.m., and I had just dropped off a passenger when I got a new request from a gas station on the edge of town. Something about it gave me an uneasy feeling, but I accepted it anyway. Maybe it was the location, or maybe it was just the exhaustion setting in. But as I pulled up, I realized why my gut had been warning me. The gas station was closed. The lights were off, the lot was empty, and standing near the entrance was a man in a filthy hoodie, his hands buried deep in his pockets. He was pacing, jerky and restless, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds like he was being watched. There wasn't a single car around, and he clearly wasn't fueling up. I should have canceled the ride. My finger hovered over the button, but for some reason, I hesitated. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the doors, and the guy slid into the back seat without a word. The moment I pulled away from the gas station, I regretted it. Most passengers either scroll through their phones or stare out the window. Not him. He just sat there, staring at me through the rearview mirror. Not blinking, not looking away. I tried to ignore him, turning on the radio to break the silence, but as soon as the music started, his voice cut through the car. "Turn it off." His tone was low, raspy, and authoritative. I fumbled for the dial and shut it off, gripping the wheel a little tighter. We drove in silence for a while before he finally spoke again. "Ever pick up someone you shouldn't have?" The question made my skin crawl. I let out a forced chuckle and said, "I hope not." But he didn't react. Instead, he leaned back and muttered something under his breath. Then he started rambling. He told me he used to drive for a rideshare service too, but quit after some passengers stole from him. His words slurred together, and I could only catch bits and pieces of his story. But through the rearview mirror, I could see it. He was smiling the whole time. A normal person wouldn't smile talking about something like that. Then, as if to drive home how uncomfortable I was, he muttered, "Funny how much trust you put in someone sitting right behind you." That was when I knew I was in danger. I kept my focus on the road, silently willing the ride to end. My hands were slick with sweat as I watched the GPS count down the miles. He kept mumbling to himself, his tone shifting between regretful and eerily calm. He started apologizing to someone, though I don't think it was me. He kept whispering, "I didn't mean it," followed by frantic, half-mumbled sorries. We were only a few minutes from his destination when he suddenly snapped out of it and yelled at me, "You missed the turn." I hadn't. The GPS clearly showed we were on track, but fear got the best of me and I slammed on the brakes anyway. "Pull over," he demanded. My hands were shaking as I did what he said. As soon as I shifted into park, headlights appeared behind us. A police car. I barely had time to process what was happening before I noticed the man in my back seat slouching down, trying to stay out of sight. He lay almost perfectly flat on my back seat. His eyes squeezed shut like he thought if he didn't move, I wouldn't see him. I wanted to ask him to get out. I wanted to yell, but I kept my mouth shut. For what felt like an eternity, he stayed in that position. The tension in the car so thick, I could barely breathe. Then, just as suddenly, he sat up, glanced at the cop car and whispered, "You got lucky." Before I could react, he opened the door and vanished into the night. I ended my shift right there. I was too shaken to keep driving. But the worst part, a few weeks later, I came across a news article about a gas station robbery that happened the same night I picked up that guy, 2 blocks from where I had picked him up. It makes me sick knowing I had a dangerous criminal in my car, inches away from me. If the police car hadn't driven by when it did, who knows what would have happened. I installed a dash cam the very next day, and now I trust my gut every single time. I used to live in the city. The urban lifestyle was exactly what I had envisioned for myself, until an event so traumatic forced me to leave it all behind. I won't get into the details, but after that night, I couldn't bear even the smallest noises. My psychiatrist told me I had developed a rare case of phonophobia, an intense fear of sound. Every honking horn, every slamming door sent a jolt through my nervous system. My body was always bracing for something that wasn't coming. I couldn't keep living like that. About 3 years ago, I found a cabin deep in the Pacific Northwest. I won't say exactly where, for reasons you'll soon understand. All I'll say is that it was somewhere in Oregon. It was perfect. No traffic, no bustling city life, barely any cell service, just peace and quiet. For the first time in months, I thought I might actually feel safe. The cabin itself was small but sturdy. It smelled like pine and old books, the kind of earthy scent you find in well-loved bed and breakfasts. The nearest neighbor was about a 10-minute walk down a winding dirt path, though I didn't meet her right away. For the first few days, I just soaked in the silence. No sirens, no shouting, just the wind rustling through the trees. About a week after moving in, I got my first visitor. There was a knock at the door, something I wasn't used to anymore, since the cabin had no doorbell. When I opened it, there stood an older woman, holding a basket of preserves like she'd stepped out of a Hallmark movie. She introduced herself as Eleanor and told me she lived nearby. She had piercing blue eyes that made me feel like she could see right through me. She wasn't rude, just blunt. She handed me the basket without asking if I even wanted it. I thanked her, and she just stood there watching me. Then she said something that sent a chill down my spine. Always keep your lanterns full, your windows shut tight, and your wits sharper than your axe. It sounded more like a warning than friendly advice. Before I could ask what she meant, she gave me a knowing nod and walked away. I watched her disappear down the path, and only then did I exhale. The encounter unsettled me, but I told myself she was just eccentric. After all, living in isolation can do strange things to people. That night, a rare thunderstorm rolled in. The flickering power made the cabin feel even smaller, but I found comfort in the sound of rain. I curled up with a book, grateful for the solitude. Then, just as I was starting to doze off, there was a knock at the door. A hard, urgent banging that nearly sent me leaping out of my skin. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached the door. Through the window pane, I saw Eleanor, soaked to the bone, her flashlight clutched tightly in her hands. When I opened the door, she spoke before I could greet her. "I saw someone near your woodpile," she blurted. "Just thought you should know." Her words sent a cold wave through me. I stepped onto the porch, shining my flashlight into the rain. Nothing. Just the endless stretch of trees. I asked her if she was sure. She nodded, her eyes darting toward the woods like she expected someone to emerge at any second. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the downpour. I stood there, drenched in confusion, before retreating inside. Something didn't sit right with me. If her house was a 10-minute walk away, how could she have seen someone near my cabin? That meant she had already been nearby when she saw them. Or she had been watching my cabin all along. I locked every door and window and spent the rest of the night listening. The storm eventually died down, but my unease didn't. A few hours later, I heard a branch snap just outside my bedroom window. I froze. My heart pounded as I crept to the window, barely daring to peek through the curtain. At first, I saw nothing. Then, movement. A figure stood at the edge of the trees. It was Eleanor. She wasn't facing the cabin. Her body was angled toward the woods, her long, disheveled hair draped over her shoulders. I strained to see more, but with only the moonlight to guide me, it was impossible. Then, she began to turn. I ducked beneath the window before she could catch me looking. I crouched there, heart hammering, waiting for something. When I finally mustered the courage to peek again, she was gone. I didn't sleep after that. I told myself I'd stay awake until sunrise. But just as my nerves started to settle, there was another knock at the door. It wasn't loud like before. This one was soft, almost hesitant. Still, I wasn't going to answer it. I crept to the door, peering through the window pane. It wasn't Eleanor. A burly, bearded man stood on my porch, his eyes shadowed under the brim of a baseball cap. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't seen him before, and I knew that he wasn't lost. I backed away, locking myself in the bathroom as I dialed 911. As soon as the call connected, I heard it. A loud crash as my front door splintered open. I held my breath as the sound of shattering glass filled the cabin. Heavy footsteps thudded through the living room, followed by the sound of things being thrown, broken, destroyed. He was looking for something, or someone. The police arrived faster than I expected, but by then, he was gone. The officers searched the area, but found nothing. No footprints leading away, no sign of Eleanor. I begged them to check her cabin, but when we arrived, my stomach dropped. It was abandoned. The place had been empty for years. The officers told me there were no signs of recent habitation. No firewood stacked, no dishes, no footprints leading to the door. I told them they were wrong, that I had spoken to her, that she had knocked on my door, that she had warned me, but they didn't believe me. I packed up and left the next day. I don't know what Eleanor was. Maybe she was a ghost, maybe she was just a squatter hiding in plain sight, or maybe she really was trying to warn me. All I know is that I'll never set foot in those woods again. My name is Luke. My girlfriend Catherine and I met 3 years ago as freshmen in college. We go to Stanford, which has been my dream school since I was 8. Neither of us are from California. Far from it, actually. We're both from Ohio, her from Cincinnati, and me from just outside Columbus. I think that's a big reason we were drawn to each other. One of our holiday traditions is splitting Christmas between our families. Since her house is just a 2-hour drive from mine, we spend Christmas Eve with my family, who celebrates at night, and then drive through the night to her house for Christmas Day. Oddly enough, my favorite part isn't Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. It's the late night drive. It's our own little tradition, something we both look forward to every year. The route from my house to hers doesn't take us on a major highway. It's mostly quiet back roads, just fields, trees, and the occasional farmhouse. It's always really late at night when we do it, and we rarely encounter other cars. It feels like the world is asleep, and we have it all to ourselves. We always blast Juice WRLD during the drive. His music has been a shared obsession since we met. There's something special about singing the lyrics together, like we're in sync. This past Christmas Eve started like any other. After a night with my extended family, we packed up my car around midnight and hit the road. The snow was falling lightly, and the roads were deserted. Everything felt perfect. Then my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I ignored it without thinking, probably just a scam call. Catherine made a joke about how committed those telemarketers must be to call on Christmas, and we laughed about it. But then, a few minutes later, my phone rang again. Another unknown number. I sighed, letting it go to voicemail. Catherine glanced at me with a confused look, but didn't say anything. 2 minutes later, my phone rang a third time. I was pissed. I grabbed my phone aggressively, ready to tell whoever it was to screw off. I startled Catherine with how quickly I reacted, but when I answered, I was met with silence. Then, static. I was about to hang up when a man's voice spoke. "Hello, Luke." I nearly swerved off the road. I couldn't speak. Before I could respond, the man continued. He started reciting personal information. My full name, my address, details about my life that no stranger should know. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. I wanted to pull over, but I kept driving, feeling like I was in some kind of trance. After a pause, I finally found my voice. I asked him what he wanted, trying to keep my tone steady despite the fear creeping into my chest. He paused before saying something that made my blood run cold. "I'm not here for you. I'm here for Catherine." Hearing her name was 10 times more terrifying than hearing my own. I glanced at Catherine. The horrified expression on her face told me she was just as shocked as I was. I blurted out that he had the wrong number, that I didn't know a Catherine. The man chuckled. "She's sitting right next to you." That was it for me. I pulled over to the side of the road. My hands were shaking. I was about to demand answers when Catherine reached over and, in one fluid motion, hung up the phone. I stared at her, furious. Why would she do that? A stranger had just made personal threats toward us, and she cut off the only source of information we had. She didn't answer me, just looked at me with wide, fearful eyes. I tried calling the number back. Once, twice, 3 times. Each time it never went through. Catherine told me to keep driving, which I did, but not before questioning her. She insisted she was scared and just reacted. I wanted to believe her, but something in the pit of my stomach felt off. Catherine and I have had a solid relationship, but there have been small things. White lies, half-truths, moments where I caught her being less than honest. I knew I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The rest of the drive was silent. I didn't play music again, and neither of us spoke. My mind was spinning with a million unanswered questions. Who was that man? How did he know so much about me? About us? Only our families knew we were driving that night, and I knew for a fact that none of them would ever pull something like this. That left only one explanation. Someone else knew. When we finally pulled into Catherine's driveway, I still felt unsettled. It's been almost a month since this happened, and I still don't have answers. Neither of our family members were responsible. We asked all of them. Catherine swears she's just as clueless as I am. That leaves only one possibility. The person on the other end of the phone had sinister intentions. Maybe you think I'm overreacting to a prank call, but I'm telling you, other than our families, no one on earth knew we'd be driving that night. I can't shake the feeling that he's going to call again. It's just a matter of time.